Hello and welcome to the War Report. We are on episode 58, and we have quite a bit of news for you today. Nothing too major, but nonetheless, just a typical week. Let's jump right into it. So we're going to get started with Syria. I'll go ahead and get the map up, and I'll get it up so you can see it as well. Give me a moment here. Turn on the. Come on, let's go. Turn on the screen share, and we're going to. And give it a moment, and when you're able to see it, uh, is it there now?
Yeah, I see it now.
Okay, so just getting into a bit of news from South Front. They report just their war report for the 11th of June 2019. Wildfire has roared across the areas in Hasaka and Deir ez-Zor provinces, targeting wheat and barley crops. Now, local sources say this was caused by remaining ISIS cells. The SAA repelled an ISIS attack east of Palmyra, killing 3 militants. A civilian was killed and another was injured in SDF actions in Al Natia and Al Namila. Clashes and artillery duels continue in northern Hama and northern Latakia.
All right, so let's translate this. So the first part of what's important is that the battle in northwest Syria, the region where the United States and the Kurdish, Rojava, uh, this sort of Netflix Antifa, whatever it is, they are occupying that region, and it is in that region
Right there in the
that
yellow.
ISIS appears to. Yep, it's right in that region where ISIS is essentially re-emerging and making gains. So of course,
Near all those oil fields.
yeah, exactly. And so of course this is this is troublesome because first of all, when you look at the Trump administration, Trump came into office cutting the funding of ISIS, which has allowed the gains that Assad has been able to make with Russia and Iran. But now this is very bad news because it may mean that there may either be an ongoing program that is still providing resources to ISIS, or it's possible that there's a new program. Regardless, it is under Trump's watch. So, we'll commonly see amongst right wing peoples that the U.S. has defeated ISIS, or that even the ones who know what's going on in terms of the fake chemical attacks or what have you, they'll even say that Obama was the one who helped ISIS, but it's Trump who has cut the funding. Well, now we know that that's at least it's highly likely that that's not true anymore. The only way ISIS could have been making gains there is through support from either the Kurds, Turkey, or the U.S., but it's likely to be most likely the U.S. or Kurds because Turkey's only interested in the northern area, kind of near Idlib. They're not quite interested in the regions where we're seeing
Yeah,
ISIS make
and,
a
and any
reemergence.
any of the other major Western powers, you'd think France, the UK mainly, they would want to do this, but they're not in the position to do this. So it is happening under Trump's watch. If it's not his direct orders, then it's somebody under him calling the shots. We've seen this many times before where Trump's orders are just completely disobeyed or completely ignored, or they twist his arm so much where he re-implements a program or starts a new program that's the same as the old one. So, yes, you're correct. This is happening under Trump, and after I would say about 2 years now of ISIS in constant retreat from the U.S. initially cutting funding to Russian, Syrian, and Iranian actions, seeing this, it raises a lot of questions, at least to me.
And it's not the only weird deal going on in Syria, because right now Turkey and Russia are in talks to have a ceasefire, a momentary ceasefire in Idlib. Part of that, I think, it has to do with completing the S-400 deal. The S-400, of course, is the anti-aircraft and the anti-missile defense system. And so, and the S-400 right now is a Russian model that is superior than the American Patriot defense system, which we actually saw fail in Saudi Arabia after the Saudis had made a huge purchase for them. So Turkey's obviously interested in the Russia's S-400s. The U.S. has been trying to block this deal, and right now it looks like Erdogan is sort of leveraging the Idlib situation as part of the sale and as part of his purchase, in terms of like he's not going to make the purchase unless Russia, you know, does some sort of ceasefire. Now, obviously, this is to pull back on. So the I don't know what it is. It might be to support the Turkish-backed militants in Idlib, or it may be to allow them a safe route out. I'm not. We're not sure which it is, but whatever it is, it's clear that Turkey has an interest in trying to get a ceasefire as part of that deal. And I believe it was Zero Hedge today tweeted that it pretty much is certain to happen, the sale.
Yeah,
And
and
so yeah, I mean, there's some wheeling and dealing going on all across the Wild West to Syria.
we,
You
we've
know.
se- we've seen this dance between Turkey and Russia for about the past year now, since last summer, in regards to the Idlib situation and the S-400 purchases. Now, as you were saying, the U.S. not too happy about that, but it's interesting looking at India. They gave sanctions waiver for their purchase for the S-400s. But in terms of Turkey and the missile air defense system purchases, the U.S. has come at them with the stick, saying, "We will not allow this. We will cut off your role in the F-35 program. We will put tariffs and sanctions on you." They've also come out with the carrot, saying, "Oh, look, we'll make you a better deal. We'll give you all these Patriot missiles for half the price." Or, of course, that being a bit exaggerative, but they're pretty much trying to undercut the Russian markets. But no matter what the U.S. comes at, no matter what counteroffer or threat they issue, Turkey is still determined to get the S-400. And again, as you said, it's pretty much gone through at this point.
I mean, why wouldn't you? The S-400 is the best defense system to a bombing campaign, and right now, that's pretty much the U.S.'s uh, strongest weapon is that they will unleash a million arrows, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so the S-400 essentially is the sort of counter to it. So obviously the U.S. wants all its neighbors to be defended, but only insofar, or all its allies defended insofar as they're not overpowering the U.S. It seems like.
And in terms of air defenses, we have to consider something. S-400, it's a Russian model. It's their latest one. They're actually developing the S-500, allegedly. Again, take Russian state media. Take it with a grain of salt, however you feel about that. But point being is, S-400 is the best that is on the market currently. And even we look at Syria with the S-200s and more recently the S-300s. Although that entire year of Israeli strikes we had from April of last year up until I'd say about January of this year, with a few in between here and there since now in January, even the S-200s were downing Israeli missiles, which, keep in mind, are U.S. made, and where do you think they get all their weapons? So even their technology from the late 1960s was still an impeccable air defense. Because what a lot of people have to understand about Russian military doctrine since the Second World War, it's been focused on, they were anticipating another invasion from their Western Front. And with the way the Germans handled them in World War II, with the massive air superiorities they had, especially at the beginning of the war, Russians took that into account and said, we need to focus on air defenses, and have focused on them pretty much since 1945.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That's really great information.
Now, unless you have any,
Um,
go on.
no, that's it for Syria for me. I mean, we can move on to Yemen.
Yeah, that's what I was just about to say. So we'll get that. We'll close the Syrian map, and we'll get the Yemen map up right now. So
The main thing to know up front is that there's essentially two Yemens. There's the Yemen that's controlled by the Saudis and UAE and U.S. coalition, and then there's the Yemen that's controlled by the Houthis, which is
now,
near the.
to put that in perspective, on the
Uh,
map, the Houthis are the red, and the U.S. Saudi coalition are the blue. And interesting enough, I pointed this out in previous episodes. It almost mirrors the border divide from when Yemen was split into North and South Yemen.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. And there's like sectarian reasons for this divide.
Yes.
Um, but my point here is that where the Houthis are occupying that region of Yemen is under U.S. blockade, which prevents essentially food, medical supplies, essentially the basics. And so right now, I believe there is an estimate that about 13 million Yemenis face starvation this year, which is, I mean, and that's starvation. I mean, starving to death. And so it's amazing that this hasn't been getting the attention that it would. I mean, there are members of Congress who are actively trying to present bills to stop the arming of Saudi Arabia due to its engagement in Yemen. But the thing is that what's really hurting the situation is the U.S. blockades. No one seems to be talking about that. Um, but in terms of other actual military news, it appears that the Houthis have actually, despite starving to death, are actually winning and making advances on the actual grounds. And it looks like they have recently have been encroaching into southern Arabia. So where that red portion is, there see it appears they're encroaching into the tan.
Yeah, and
And
actually,
so
you can see it on the map right above what Najran. There's a little red that crossed. There's a little red blob that crossed the border right there. And from that, I got the exact numbers. They advanced in southern Saudi Arabia. Now, according to their official sources, the Houthis' official sources, they managed to capture 20 military sites and destroy more than 20 vehicles and kill around 200 fighters in a period of 72 hours.
yeah, they're clearly a superior fighting group, and it's showing. With all this crazy footage that's coming out, no one would have predicted this. That not only would the Houthis be able to defend themselves from the Saudis and the U.S., but then they'll also be invading Saudi Arabia at the same time. It's pretty astonishing. It's something that, frankly, we need to study a little bit more.
Yes, and for those of you who don't know, which is probably very few of you, the Houthis are a Shia Muslim group, and the south of Saudi Arabia isn't that where most of the Shia Muslims are concentrated? No, Saudi Arabia is about 10-15% Shia.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it has a small Shia minority in Saudi. Yeah.
So again, it goes down to sectarian conflicts and it goes down to
Hmm.
again the breakdown. But
Yeah, yeah.
I
The
doubt we're going to
Houthis
see
are.
I doubt we're going to see many Saudis join the Houthis, but point being is, it's still something to keep your eye on. It's still an interesting thing. And I have a bit more news
Hmm.
on just some small developments in Yemen. I'll get out of the way. So, Ansar Allah targeted Malik Khaled Air Base near Kami's Musati Airport with several suicide drones. Clash between Ansar Allah and Saudi-led forces were reported at the Al Balqa area. Clash between Ansar Allah and Saudi-led forces were reported also in the Bakem area. Saudi-led forces advanced west of Hairan. Clashes between Ansar Allah and Saudi-led forces were again reported in the Gataba district. Now, Saudi warplanes struck the area of Harad and Midi 12 times. Saudi-led coalition warplanes struck the Kita area 7 times. And yet again, every time we talk about Yemen, ceasefires were being violated on the daily, and this time they were being violated in the Hudaydah city.
Crazy stuff, man. It's amazing that they're able to do this.
I mean, they've been holding out. They've
All
pretty
right,
much.
should we move on to Iran?
Yeah. But just a final thought on this. This blob
Yeah.
of red they've controlled, they've gained more territory gradually over time, made their gains and losses, but they've pretty much controlled this chunk of land since 2015 for the past 4 years, and that being while they're starving to death and pretty much cut off from the outside world. So pretty impressive. Regardless of what you think of them, I mean, again, me being me, I really don't care what's happening on the Arabian Peninsula, but that's aside the point. Now we will move on to Iran because you have quite the story. You were telling me about it over the past few days, and I'll let you take the lead on this
Yeah,
one
yeah.
about the
So
Voice of
here, so
America
last week
stuff.
we talked about the Yeah. So last week we talked about Iran Disinfo, the U.S. State Department account that was being run through a like 60, 70-year-old Persian cat lady. So this week it was revealed that there's a prominent Twitter account, and this individual was actually an author who would write articles regarding Iran or the Iran deal or U.S.-Iran relations, and he would be published in a lot of various right-wing or even liberal journals. And the Twitter account was named Heshma Alevi. So it was presented as a real person. He was presented as an Iranian activist, actually.
And I'll actually
And
pull
so
that up right now. If you're, he's of course the one next to Donald Trump. That's the account. Yeah, I knew there was something shady about this guy. I actually got into it a little bit with him last year when we first pulled out the Iran deal. I pretty much called him a neocon shill, and I almost immediately blocked him. So I had a feeling, yeah, he's tied to some, if not government organization, some NGO or some advocacy group that again reports anyone calling them out.
yeah, and the article we're talking about it was reported by the Intercept by Murtaza Hussain. He is reporting that the account was actually run by Mech. That this is a fake picture, a fake name, fake author, and the articles in the account was run by essentially a group called Mech. Now, this might be someone's first time hearing this show, but well, I think we should explain who Mech is. So Mech is essentially it's an acronym for the Mujahideen Halq, who is the group that the U.S. wants to replace the Ayatollahs with, essentially. And who they are essentially a communist Islamist. I'm not kidding. This is how they openly identify a communist Islamist group. They practice polyamory. Again, this is stuff they openly admit to. I'm not. I'm not here to poke fun, but they also finance really important politicians, Rudy Giuliani and John Bolton being their two of their main employees. And so Mech was once on the U.S. terror list, but he got removed due to Rudy Giuliani's lobbying. And today, they're essentially getting a lot of support from the State Department, from who knows, from possibly even Saudi Arabia, getting a lot of money from Saudi Arabia. But it appears that Mac essentially created this fake account, and they've been writing articles deceiving. I mean, literal. Again, we talked about last week. The president who was against fake news was had a State Department program that was creating fake news. Well, I mean, here's another example of that again. This is just fake news, and one of the articles that this account had written was an article that accused Iran of increasing its military spending from the money it received from the Iran deal. Now, that was never true, but it was that article that Trump cited as the reason for why he was leaving the JCPOA. So, um, it's no small matter that this was like some fake troll account. It ultimately, it gave Trump a public citation for a reason to perform this drastic move. So, it's definitely important to understand who these characters are because, I mean, and sniffing them out, we have to learn how to sniff these characters out.
Yeah, I
What
mean,
did you think about this?
at first when I first engaged this guy, I didn't think I thought he was a real person. I just thought he was either a shill or somebody with an ulterior motive. Now I realize he didn't even exist. And for some insight on Mech, the MEK, if you out there in the audience remember John Bolton's speech in late 2017 talking about there will be the regime change in Iran by the end of 2018, pretty sure it was at a Mech conference he gave that speech.
Yeah, it's most likely probably is.
Yeah,
Because I mean,
yes.
John Bolton had little. I mean, his political career was basically nothing before Trump, and the only way he stayed relevant was he was getting promoted by Mech, and I don't know how Mech was getting the money to pay him. And Mech's really weird. It's like a cult. And here's the thing: if you look into it right now, excuse me, excuse me, Mech is currently stationed in a compound in Albania. And Albanian authorities actually have been complaining to the U.S. government for years now because the U.S. won't let the local authorities do anything to them. They can't collect taxes. They can't enforce the local laws on them. They're literally in a compound. And I mean, I got to send you pictures for the next week's show so we can put them up. But it's
Are they
very
hiding
cold
out
like.
in one of Hawks' old bunkers? He built like 300,000 of them.
Who knows? Who knows? I mean, it looks like a compound. It's like Branch Davidians on steroids.
Yeah, and you'll recall, not to get off on too much of a tangent. I believe it was in London where mech stormed an embassy and tried to raise their group's flag over it. I can't remember. I think it may have been, strange enough, the Iraqi embassy that they stormed.
No, I think you're thinking about the British Iranian embassy that was raided by like that British group. I think that's what you're thinking of, right?
Yeah, it
And they
might
flew the
be.
flag.
Yeah. That,
They are like mech associated. Yeah, you're definitely on the right track.
but
Um, yeah, they're a crazy bunch. They're a crazy bunch who is getting a lot of support. I mean, it's and frankly, not enough people are talking about this outside of our show. It was nice to see the George Nader. Uh, I don't know if you saw this, but George Nader, that story made its rounds. Even got up to Michael Tracy. He was reporting on the George Nader FDD link too, so it's pretty cool to see that. It's not many people who have these conversations, so it's good that we do.
yeah, on that note, share the show around. You got Twitter, you got any social media? Just throw the link out. It only takes a few seconds out of your day. But more news on Iran. So the Iranians have accelerated uranium enrichment according to the IAEA. So, again, for the 30th year in a row, we're getting the Iran is 6 months away from the bomb routine. Now, just put that in perspective. I don't think I really need to debunk this for anyone in our audience. North Korea, with about one third the manpower and way less economic power, managed to develop a nuclear arsenal in less than a decade, and yet Iran has not developed one bomb in the past 30 years. So maybe they're just incompetent. Maybe they're not trying to build a bomb at all. We'll never know.
Who knows? I mean, it's could anyone be surprised that this is happening? I mean, if it's real, because part of Iran's demands to meet with Trump is that he, one, reinstate the JCPOA, or they're going to increase, enrichment or bomb making materials, and I think that's a lot of it's more just a show of aggression, not really so much as like they're gonna actually build the bomb.
Yeah, it's
But we'll
definitely more
see.
posturing than anything, because if they were to build a bomb, especially with Netanyahu in power, I could see the Israelis taking very rash actions. Maybe a preemptive strike. I don't know. Maybe I'm giving them too much credit. But to repeat the old cliches, Gaddafi gave up his nuclear weapons, and look what happened to him. Assad gave up his chemical weapons, and look what's happening to him. Look at North Korea. If they gave up their nukes at the Singapore summit, which we'll be talking about just a 1 year retrospective, where do you think Kim Jong Un would be right now? What reason do the Iranian leadership have to not at least do this from a projection standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny because like we're talking about nuclear weapons, which is kind of insane if you think about it. But if this same logic applies to something even way less dangerous in terms of the JCPOA, what incentive does Iran have to ever talk to Trump right now? Right now, it's really difficult for Trump to like essentially get a handle of Iran for a meeting, and so he's sending Shinzo Abe, the Japanese Prime Minister, to sort of feel him out for him. And it's predicted that Shinzo Abe is gonna ask the Iranians, Rouhani specifically, to meet with Trump later this year at the UN General Assembly. And if you recall, the this happened, I believe, 2 years ago. It was in 2017
I think it was
when
2018.
Trump. Yeah, maybe it was 20. No, no, no. This was no. You're so right. You're right. In 2018, Trump tried to meet with Rouhani at no, this was 2017. This was 2017. Trump tried to meet Rouhani at the UN General Assembly, and he declined to meet with them and that was before he exited the nuclear deal. So I don't know the likelihoods of this actually happening, but it's predicted that that's what Shinzo is going to present once he arrives in Tehran.
Now, interesting you brought that up again because you brought that up last week, and Abe is taking a state visit to Iran for 3 days, starting on Wednesday, which tomorrow for us will be today for you and the audience watching this live. Now, he is set to meet with Rouhani, Zarif, and Khamenei. Now, as you said, it's speculated he'll try to arrange a meeting between Trump and Rouhani at the UN summit. Now, how successful that will be, who knows? I mean, look, I know, especially concerning the influence of a certain greatest ally of ours, the situations in North Korea and Iran are drastically different, but if Trump met with Kim, I would say it's definitely within the realm of possibility. Much less likely, however, but I'm not completely discounting it. But with the influence of
I mean, a photo opportunity would only benefit Trump.
yes,
You
and
know,
but with the influence of figures such as, of course, Mike Pompeo and John Bolton, it is going to be an uphill battle getting this. But another interesting meeting the Iranians had with a foreign nation was they met with the German foreign minister, uh, Heiko Maas. Now, Maas actually said they are soon the development of a system to circumvent U.S. sanctions will be ready soon. And Zarif also said he's determined to keep the EU held to the JCPOA. So it's interesting because you see the Germans taking this interesting direction. Even the more establishment Germans, someone like a Merkel, like somebody in Merkel's government, where they're willing to cooperate with the Russians on energy and they're willing to talk to the Iranians and open up trade with them. You're getting Germany, maybe not on a social level, maybe not on a political level, but on a geopolitical level, starting to shift towards the east.
yeah, and it's kind of funny because this conversation ended with the Germans telling reporters that it was very constructive, but the Iranians saying that they're not getting enough slack from Europe. And this is sort of the problem that the EU really does fear Trump. They are afraid to go against the US in dealing with Iran and getting sanctioned. And so part of the frustration with that meeting was this that Germany is trying to get Iran to remain in compliance uh, and still try to work with Trump to stay in, while both are sort of wanting have higher demands. Now, it was funny because I tweeted out images of the 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 front day news the front page of the next day's newspaper in Iran, which included cartoons of the meeting, and one of the cartoons was absolutely hilarious and ridiculous looking. But what it was it depicted the German foreign minister giving a Roman salute with an actual the Reich armband, and on his face he had the glasses of in the shape of the Star of David, with a tie of the U.S. flag shaped like a bomb. And so clearly they were not happy with the situation. They expected more from Germany. And I think the German minister was probably doing the best he could and walked out getting totally spit on, which is very unfortunate for him. But I mean, I think you can understand why the demands would be much higher on the Iran side.
Yeah, yes, I understand that, and but nonetheless, it's still interesting the fact that this meeting even happened. That something that would have been, I would say, unimaginable even in 2014.
Yeah, politics makes interesting bedfellows. Never forget that.
Now, speaking of which, perfect transition because I'm about to move on to our good friends over the LGBTQ and but some Pride Month news. So let's find the one I want to get into first, which is I don't have a picture for that one, but the Trump administration has moved to shoot down an Obama era policy that allowed U.S. embassies to fly rainbow flags under the U.S. flag during Pride Month. But some embassies are circumventing the administration's orders. Now, embassies in Israel, of course, Germany, Brazil, and Latvia all asked to fly rainbow flags this year, and all were denied. Now, as an alternative, embassies have began shining rainbow lights on them or hanging them on building facades. So they're still flying the rainbow flag, just not under the U.S. flag, because under the Obama era guidelines, what it was is you could fly it, it just had to be smaller than the U.S. flag and under the U.S. flag. I mean, now it's only a matter of time until we get this flying during Pride Month, if not all year round.
Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous that Trump's orders wasn't allowed to go through because it was reported that he was requesting that none of the embassies or ships or anything fly the flag, or at least not near the flag, the U.S. flag. So, you would think as commander in chief, he could order what color uniforms they should be wearing or what have you, but clearly there is a there is a bureaucracy and that he has to deal with. So
And
I was pretty.
it gets even better
Oh, go ahead.
because when State Department spokeswoman Morgan Ortagus was asked about this, they she told the reporters that there were no policy violations. That means this was allowed just on the flagpole, and fundamentally, we're one president away from having that flying during Pride Month under the U.S. flag.
Yeah, I mean it's clearly telling every other country what the U.S. stands for. It's not freedom, it's not democracy, it's definitely gay rights. So that I
It's
mean that's what the worry of the embassies were. That's what the worry of many of the people in uniform is. I really feel bad for a lot of the people in the military and the military families who
yeah,
are
I mean,
clearly tend to be conservative. This is just kind of kicking them while they're down. So I understand why Trump was trying to stop this. It's really a shame,
yeah,
but
you look at military
clearly,
enlistments, places like Texas, places like Indiana, the Midwest, the South in general. It's not New York and California. They're usually the
mhm,
salted good old country boys that join up, and they're being subjected to serve. I are I have no words for the people in charge. They're being subjected to this when all they want to do was do their country right and serve their fellow man and defend their nation. And now, instead of being
yeah,
placed on the border, they're being used as pawns to try to decriminalize homosexuality.
yeah, it's an absolute shame. I mean,
And it gets better in terms of U.S. Pushing diversity in the LGBTQCI community. So I'm going to pull up a tweet here now for those of you in the audience who read Polish, which I think I have a couple Polish subscribers. But I will translate. I do have the translation right here. So, the official account of the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw tweeted on Saturday, quote, "We are on the Equality Parade to express our support in the friendly atmosphere for the ideas of tolerance, mutual acceptance, equality, and protection of human rights for all people, including LGBT plus people, persons." Excuse me. Now, I didn't get any of the screen cap of these, but I had to, of course, translate a lot of them. A lot of Polish people were not happy.
no, I mean, can you blame them? I mean, Poland is one of the more conservative places. So, I mean, a lot of this policy is just clearly meant to just agitate.
And GSP and I have discussed over the past few months. I believe we actually got into this last week in terms of the populist rising in Europe. And Poland is a bit of an outlier in the sense where they still want to continue with the very anti-Russia policy. They still want to oppose Russian aggression, what have you. Whereas some like an Orban in Hungary or Salvini in Italy want to improve relations with Russia to the point where you could argue it helps ward that off because you have this happen all the time with Orban. The EU will give him trouble. They will try to impose something on Hungary, and he'll have a summit with Putin within the next week. The Poles, they can't do that. Now, the way I see it, I believe they're moving more towards that direction, especially as the United States and the European Union overplay their hands. But the point being is Poland isolating themselves. They still want to have this conservative, nationalistic, very Catholic out view of the world. yet they want to side with the liberal West because of bad blood they have with the Russians.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, man.
But beyond that, just one last thing I had to show you. I don't really have a story attached to this, but I would say this pretty much encapsulates where we stand now. Nasdaq supports the Lithuanian LGBT community at Baltic Pride, excuse me, in Vilnius, Lithuania, June 4th through 9th, 2019. So we missed Baltic Pride. Hopefully, we can get there next year.
Yeah, it's never gonna end. This is like Pride year, Pride decade,
Pride Millennium. Come on.
Pride millennium.
I mean,
The future.
I party until
The
3019.
future's Pride.
Oh boy, but I mean, again, you're not to get off on too much of a tangent, but the underdogs fighting just for the rights, supported by international finance, the U.S. State Department. How do they survive? It's such a brave, inspiring story seeing them go on day to day.
I mean, it's just such a. I mean, going back to the recruitments, I mean, it's just really bad optics. I don't see how this is just helping anyone. I don't see how this is helping them. The
It,
military, that meaning, even the ones who want this. It's not driving. It's not creating fear in your enemies. It's giving them a reason to be angry. It's not driving recruitment. I mean, it's just a policy of agitation. That's all it is.
I mean, yeah, and I go on about this before. I mean, it's declining now as the United States hits rough times, but in terms of raw power, the United States is undisputedly the most powerful nation in the world economically and militarily. But we keep on squandering it and squandering our capital and our reputation on things like this.
Yeah, this isn't cheap to to decriminalize homosexuality. It's not going to be cheap.
I believe the
And I
Obama
mean,
administration, throughout Obama's second term, spent about 700 million on it.
yeah, and we're talking about not just like actual military weapons. We're talking about a lot of it is like advertising too.
Yeah,
Just like
propaganda like the stuff we just showed you.
yeah, I mean, you look at a lot of the NSA tweets that were made over like last week. That required hiring someone to do the Photoshop. And that's stuff that our money is being spent on, as ridiculous as it may sound. But that is how this bureaucracy works. It's just one little prole doing a job after another.
Now, moving on just a little, this is a bit of an interesting story. So, the UK Labour Party is accusing Mike Pompeo of trying to stop Jeremy Corbyn from becoming Prime Minister after Pompeo was caught in a recording telling Jewish leaders that he would, quote, push back against Labour leadership if Corbyn got into office because of his anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic views.
This was probably one of the weirdest stories of the last week, only because you have the Trump admin who was actually accusing the British M16 of spying on his campaign and fabricating that golden dossier. I don't even want to get into the facts of that.
Yeah, it's
But
been debunked a
regardless,
million times. Somebody else has done it before us, so.
yeah, it's a long drawn out story, but the point is that Trump came into office blaming England for essentially interfering in the election, and so this I don't know if this is a type of revenge, but it's a weird type of revenge because Corbyn is being accused of not being nice to the Zionists, and so Pompeo is essentially uh, you know helping out the people who may have helped England fabricate the dossier against Trump. And so it's this interesting dynamic now that Pompeo has sort of is trying to make Corbyn his like arch enemy right now. But if there's anyone that I would love to see sucker punch Pompeo, it would be Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, that guy has some pretty awesome politics. He seems like an upstanding dude.
He's a
What
bit
do you
too
think?
socially liberal for my taste, but I don't hate him as much as some people do. I'll say that. Now, the interesting thing about Corbyn is,
Well, here. Well, on that thought, real quickly,
go on.
I think it's the best way to judge a man is the same way we judge Trump is by who hates him,
Yeah,
right?
I would say,
Not by who likes him. So I think that's a good way to look at it. And I think if Pompeo hates you, that's you're in good
you're doing at
good
least something
company.
right.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of Corbyn, it's actually interesting because you compare him to at least campaign Trump. They have a lot more in common than Trump has with somebody like Theresa May or any of the other conservative figures in the UK. Sort of that outsider coming in. I mean, Corbyn, beyond pressure within his own party, is pretty anti-European Union, pretty skeptical of all these current institutions that have governed the post-war world. So it's a bit interesting because Corbyn is a bit like a Donald Trump on the left in the UK. So honestly, if Trump were fully Trump and not constrained by whoever, I imagine they would probably get along a lot more than he does with pretty much any other person who would be potentially the next British Prime Minister.
Yeah, I mean Corbyn's base is definitely this like working class group. It's a lot of working class socialist leftist types who I think a fair sort of comparison would be DSA, but they are actually woke on the Zionist issue, the Labor Party, meaning. DSA is obviously not, but DSA seems to be sort of like an AstroTurf version of Labor here.
Yeah, I would say so. And again, I'm I know I'm probably asking too much, but honestly, I probably wouldn't have a problem with Corbyn if he would go full socially conservative. That would probably actually be a pretty nice platform I would support. But that is all aside the point. But at the end of the day, I would definitely take him over someone like pretty much anyone in British politics. Now, moving on to more European politics, a bit of an interesting dust-up happened in Moldova. Now, Moldova, the former Soviet republic, of course, majority Romanian, significant minority Russian populations. I'll pull up the poll there. So, Moldova's pro-Russian president Igor Dodon has been stripped of his power following an inconclusive general election back in February. Now, this came after Dodon's party, which is the red and black party here on the graph, uh, agreed to form a coalition with a pro EU bloc. Of course, this was a move back by the European Union. Now, outgoing Prime Minister Pavel Filip challenged this move, and he won in the courts and was appointed as the interim president and announced that fresh elections were to be held in September. Now, these polls I'm showing you are from the beginning of May, and the red and black party right here is the pro Russian party, the party of the current president who's been stripped of his power. Of course, you have the establishment right wing, the EPP, the establishment left wing, and the SED. The slightly less establishment right wing in the ECR, and so on and so forth. The only party that has actually made any gains is the PSRM, which was the party of the president, who again's role is secondary to the prime minister. But the thing GSP, and unfortunately he couldn't be with us tonight, have talked about, especially in Moldova, is everything they've tried on Ukraine, everything they've tried on a lot of these other former Soviet republics seems to fall flat. For example, it was actually a mayoral election at the capital city, Chistanu, I believe it's pronounced. Again, I would have GSP correct me, but he's not here. Nothing against him, honestly. He's a busy man. He's got real life to live, unlike the rest of us. But point being is, they actually had a pro EU, pro Western mayor elected, and there were riots. People were not happy about this. They pushed the pride parades in Moldova. The people were not happy about this. So specifically Ukraine, but everything they've thrown at these former communist countries, these former Soviet republics, just seems to be bouncing off Moldova. So just credit to them for being able to resist this for so many years, pretty much since the now late 1990s when we really started to encroach on them. I know it happened before that, but that's really when we went full force after this. So just good luck to the PSRM in September.
Yeah, these elections have just been absolutely crazy. I mean, in terms of what type of populist support they're sort of revealing, or pro-Russian support that it's revealing, and in a lot of these former, was Moldova a former Soviet
Yes.
state? Yeah, so I mean, here you have clear historical sort of reemergence. Now, yeah, I talked about this today on Twitter a little bit about these various forms of imperialism. One is sort of a market form of imperialism. You sort of see that with communism and with the U.S. in terms of enforcing capitalism. You
Yeah,
see this
neoliberalism, the whole post-war
exactly.
order.
I mean, the Chinese tariffs dispute, or the Mexico dispute, the Southeast China Seas disputes, or the trade routes. This is all the U.S. Defending its imperialism in the sense that the U.S. is defending markets. The other form of imperialism is sort of an encroachment or spread into sort of similar or like-minded regions that are, spatially near, with the expanding nation. And so what you're sort of seeing with this sort of ebbs and flows of Eastern Europe, attaching itself to Russia and not, is this sort of this battle between these two forms of systems, one sort of wanting this sort of cultural imperialism, one sort of having this wanting this sort of market imperialism. Is that making any sense?
Absolutely, and as I said, they've been doing this for decades now, and it's interesting the fact that it took that long for them to start pushing it off because you could see with the ascension of Poland and Hungary and a lot of these Eastern European states into NATO and the European Union, it was for economic reasons. Like, oh, you're poor, you've been ravaged by communism. Here, come here, we'll throw billions at you, and that's actually the reason a lot of these countries still support the European Union despite detesting their migration policies because they get so much money for them. And frankly, I would say, at least from their point of view, if you're going to entice these Eastern European countries, which in a lot of cases would be better off aligning themselves with the Russians, you better be sweetening the pot a lot if you want them to stick around.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, integrating a lot of these countries into the global market has been extremely beneficial for them. GDP all-time high, unemployment for non-indigenous all-time low. You will have these sort of statistics, but I mean, will it create a civilization that will last? That remains to be seen.
I would definitely agree. And again, they're willing to sacrifice their entire nation on the altar of GDP, which is GDP X group's unemployment rate. Oh, look at how many women are in the workforce now instead of raising families. All that kind of stuff, all the stuff that Trump loves to brag about the only accomplishments they've given him. But that's a side the point. Now, moving on, I do have a bit on speaking of the economic imperialism, as you're saying, Trump's tariff threats. Now, Trump has threatened to impose additional tariffs on Chinese goods if President Xi Jinping does not show up to the G20 summit at the end of this month. Now, this follows Trump threatening another $300 billion worth of levy on Chinese goods if an agreement on trade isn't made soon. Now, as I said, I don't necessarily oppose the tariffs, I don't necessarily support them. But seeing as how far intertwined our economies have become, I think, look, the tariffs, they may increase cost on goods. Well, you might not get your X, Y, or Z, as the neoliberals will always come out, the conservatives will always come out and say. But in terms of severing the economic interdependence and how intertwined things are, again, that's going to take decades. But I think in the long run, it's good both for the people of the United States and the Chinese. Now, I do doubt Trump will be able to make a solid trade deal like he's been going into. I said this in previous weeks. He hasn't been able to even extract concessions from his own party on things like border security. And the outside world is beginning to look at that, look at Trump not even being able to control his own political party and think, this guy's supposed to be the negotiator in chief. He can't even make a deal with Mitch McConnell. This guy, we're going to be able to walk all over him.
Yeah, and I wonder how much this trade war has actually helped U.S. employment, especially in the regions where Trump won in the battleground states. Because what I worry about is that Trump is engaging in this sort of trade war, perhaps helping certain niches of the American market financially, but not necessarily resulting in actual job production. Now, he talks a lot about the unemployment being low for certain minority groups, but he brings that up because a lot of the employment that they are receiving is sort of short term, Amazon driver, delivery guy or something. You know what I mean? It's these aren't actual stable careers
Yeah, the unemployment may
that
be
are
down, but
being.
the underemployment is still a problem. The big problem under the Obama administration that a lot of conservatives, again, rightly so, call it out. It's like, oh, you have all these jobs, but they're pittances of jobs. Now, under Trump, I wasn't expecting this, but many people, especially first-time voters, people who just got into politics after years of being disenfranchised, thought he's going to reindustrialize the country. He's going to stick to China and get our factories back. But instead of actually trying to bring manufacturing home, he's just threw some tariffs on some goods.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's maybe might be something that's maybe some sort of lobbying effort by some companies. I mean, think about the dispute with Huawei. The Huawei dispute might be something that's being backed by perhaps even like Apple and Google, who do see, this sort of Chinese phone company as a competitor.
Well, yeah, I
So
mean,
who
you have
knows?
Apple who makes all their products in China, and it's like we can't have a domestic Chinese industry that cuts into our problems. Like you're supposed to be making our shit, not making your own shit.
Yeah, we might be actually seeing some type of corporate warfare. To frankly, I'm not sure how else to really put it, because you have clear access to the commander in chief, who is, I mean, sanctions are the first step to war. Tariffs. What are tariffs? Tariffs. They're not quite sanctions, but when you look at a country like China, who frankly their economy has boomed only in the last 10 years. They have gone from one of the largest poor populations to one of the largest middle class populations in the world, and this is only in like a 10-15 year period. So frankly, they're in a sort of fragile situation in terms of going back to what you were saying, the reliance, the sort of symbiotic relationship. So does I don't see China, to have benefited to the point where they can become independent at all whatsoever. So I wonder if there's just sort of like pull some strings here, pull some strings there. Let's get some, get a benefit while we can before China's economy gets too big, to handle.
Now, taking this off on actually a bit of a tangent. Now, as I said before, I have my problem with the Chinese. I ultimately don't care what they do in the South China Sea. I don't care about their border disputes with their neighbors. My problem is the influence they're trying to push here on the American continent. You see the Vancouver real estate market, that kind of stuff. And again, the interdependence. But the interdependence, the time to stop that was 15 to 20 years ago. That was on Clinton's watch. That was on Bush's watch. I would say it was even arguably too late for Obama to do anything about it. But with all that out of the way, it's interesting because Trump, at least you listen to his campaign rhetoric, his idea for foreign policy was to go hard on China, take the hard line on China, while easing up on Russia. They allowed him to take the hard line on China, but they did not allow him to ease up on Russia to the point where he's doing the hard line on both of them, which is forging an axis between them, which has created a pretty formidable rival to the United States because whoever Trump had whatever enemies Trump had appointed to him, and again, you'd think John Bolton, Mike Pompeo, etc., they did not allow him to go through that strategy. And they've created the Eurasian axis. I mean, honestly, maybe it's a good thing Brzezinski died when he did, because I imagine he's rolling over in his grave right now, seeing, especially you throw Iran onto that, seeing these three nations all work together so closely, especially over the past 2, 3 years.
And don't forget, Brzezinski's daughter is still alive.
Yeah,
She's on
Mika
Morning
Brzezinski,
Joe with
Morning
Joe
Joe.
Scarborough. Let's not get into the intern mishaps they're having over there
Oh,
in Florida, but let's not get into that. But my point being is Brzezinski's still the spirit of Brzezinski still alive and well. I mean, the ISIS finger, the pointing of the finger, was literally created by Brzezinski for the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. So believe me, the spirit of Brzezinski is alive. In fact, that should be the show title: "The Spirit of Brzezinski."
not a bad idea, but yeah. The whole thing
I
with
mean, his name. I mean, his name. What the heck? How do you spell that thing?
oh,
It is one of the most. I
it
mean, can you spell it without looking?
I'll try it right now. Brzezinski. I
No,
probably
it's
yeah.
Brzezinski. Brzezinski.
Why did
There's
why?
like a, but I think there's a silent Z when most people pronounce it.
Yeah, again
I mean,
the one the 1 week we don't have the
this is how
Slav here.
this is how ridiculous of an individual this person is. He has a silent Z in his name. I mean, his first name is spelled Zbigniew.
This is
Now I
big new.
understand there's like some Slavic or perhaps I'm not sure, but
He's
this is
Polish.
just like, yeah, I mean, it screams CIA. Let's just put it that way. His name screams CIA.
Yeah, but yeah, with that out of the way, let's move on to the final subject of the show, which is still in the East Asian region. So, June 12th, which is when this episode will be broadcasting, will mark the 1 year anniversary of the Singapore summit when Donald Trump met with Kim Jong Un of North Korea. Now, this is the first meeting between the U.S. and North Korean leadership ever. Now, while the initial meeting was warm and reconciliatory, progress grinded to a halt between the US and North Korea shortly afterwards. Now, that being said, the relations between North Korea and South Korea have been on a continual improvement even to this day. They still meet regularly. I mean, it's backed off less now that the US has stepped in more, but it's actually interesting because as the US stayed out of it, the two Koreas began to reconcile amongst themselves. You saw this actually back in February last year, the Olympic Games in Korea. They marched together. They had all these ceremonial events together. And throughout that, and I don't know when their last meeting was, but I'm pretty sure it was just a few months ago. I know they've met in 2019. But point being is, the two Koreas have continued. Now, beyond that, there was a follow up summit, of course, in Hanoi, Vietnam, in February, which ended early. Now, despite that, Trump still seemed oddly reconciliatory, such as when North Korea launched the missile test, and he was like, "Look, I trust in Kim. I think he knows what he's doing." Now, I would attribute obviously the freezing progress to mainly U.S. policy on Iran taking the complete 180, and of course figures such as John Bolton and Mike Pompeo. But it is interesting just looking from a year how I would say the situation really hasn't improved at all, at least between the U.S. and North Korea. As I said, on the Korean Peninsula between the two Koreas, I would say it's drastically improved. But in terms of the U.S. role, in my opinion, I would say we got the ball rolling between North and South Korea. So I would say all roll is over personally, and I think we're only making the situation worse and exasperating it by trying to even just arrange another summit. I think what we need to do is just say, look, North Korea exists, they have their nukes, whatever, we really don't care, and we need to move towards a gradual uh, thawing of relations, mainly through the South Korean leadership. That would be my take, at least.
Well, you know what's interesting is Moon might be predicting a sort of an imminent U.S. downfall in the sense that their sort of sphere of influence will eventually decrease, and in that to that end, it doesn't make sense for North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons then, because in the event that South Korea is no longer under U.S. Supervision or occupation, however you want to put it. I'm sure many South Koreans put it as occupation. Why you don't have to build your own nuclear weapons anymore. Your buddy's got it, right? So
Yeah,
like,
and
I don't see why. What's the incentive for South Korea and Moon to push North Korea to drop the weapons? Kim, I mean, frankly, I don't think we were getting accurate information in terms of either himself or his father's willingness to nuke South Korea. I don't think that was ever actually on the table. I think that may have just been
it
propaganda.
was a yearly extortion routine. Well, we'll test a nuclear weapon if you don't give us however much money and aid this year.
Well, testing a nuclear weapon and actually threatening to nuke South Koreans are
Yeah,
totally two different things,
yeah.
And the image that they've painted for so long was that North Korea is hell bent on just suiciding the entire peninsula. And that's frankly, I think that's a metric that South Korea is probably determined after meeting with Kim Jong Un face to face, for the first time in however many years. It was probably he probably straight up told him like, look, we were never gonna nuke you. We were never going to, or we are never going to. And so
Yeah,
that
because
sort of reassurance.
imagine where the fallout from those weapons would spread north.
Yeah. So Moon and South Korea are sort of in this situation like, we'll help both of you until one of you fuck up, and then we're gonna go to the guy who's still up, right? So I think that's sort of their assessment. I don't see why they would be playing it any other way.
Yeah, and as I said, I've said this many times before since the initial summit. As relations between North Korea and South Korea improve, which they do, I doubt it'll be an immediate reunification. But if we get some sort of confederation or at least common defense treaty or dare I say alliance between the two nations, it's beneficial for one of the two to have access to nuclear weapons. You look at the history of the Korean Peninsula, it's a history of domination, whether it's Chinese, Japanese, Mongol, Russian, US, Chinese again. They haven't, I think they haven't governed themselves for the past almost 2,000 years. So they have been presented this opportunity where they can cooperate as one Korean people and have the nuclear deterrence, and that seems like a pretty enticing offer, even for a South Korean.
Yeah, and think about Moon. I mean, Moon is his father has always had an affinity with Iran. Moon has he presently has an affinity with Iran. Obviously, they're trying to work things out with North Korea. So to me, what that says is that Moon probably is preparing for the future more than anything. And that's you have to do that. You have to in this day and age. So, uh, and they're playing their cards right. They're seeing how Iran and all these other countries are being patient, taking their time, making their moves when they can, keeping their wins when they can. It's a slow game when you're in this when you're a small country. It's a different type of game you have to play, and I think from an objective outsider, it's clear that Moon is intelligent enough that he has this sort of assessment.
Oh no, he definitely has excellent foresight in terms of the direction the world's going in. And I kind of list my foresight now. I suppose it's very fitting for Pride Month, but aside the point. But I will say this in closing with a bit of a joke I had actually when Kim Jong Un met with Putin. The way Korea is going to be reunited is through a Russian pipeline. I'm telling you, Russia, they're on pretty decent terms with both Korean states.
Yeah,
They're gonna get them to agree to have a Russian pipeline go through the Korean Peninsula, and that's what's gonna unite them.
it's very much like it's likely, very much likely.
So, unless you have any
Uh,
other closing thoughts, I'm gonna bring the show to an end.
I do not. Thank you so much. Next week we'll have GSP back, and maybe we might even have a surprise from him, or is that in a couple weeks?
That's in a couple weeks when he takes his
Okay.
journey to an undisclosed location. Currently, he's in Moscow for his KGB debriefing. It's very you
His
bring
Dugan, his Duganism debriefing.
yes, thank you. You bring one Slav on board, and all of a sudden, you're a KGB operation. But with that out of the way, we'll see you guys next week, and goodbye.